Hi, my fellow historians. So, as promised, most of the videos you've been watching this year are actually a couple years old. Many of them are from my last district. And I said, moving forward this year, many of the videos, not all, but I'll try to record new ones. And the problem with our school is that there's no quiet place for me to record them. There's no empty classroom or office area, and it's raining outside. So for you, I am here in my car. I hope you feel appreciated. So we're going to briefly talk about the Mexican War. The Mexican War is something I would love to spend like 2 weeks on. I read a really good book this summer on it, and I didn't incorporate it into this presentation like I thought I would. But I might make an addendum video with some of the thoughts from it, or I might read it for one of our Wednesday storytime sessions. So anyway, here is an abbreviated version of the Mexican War. And what I'm going to do first is I'm going to show you how it's presented by school textbooks. I won't say the name of this one. We don't really use textbooks in our class, but I'm just taking the first sentence from every paragraph. There's 2 pages on this. Now, interestingly enough, I actually obtained a textbook from the 1940s, and there's many pages on the Mexican War in the book from the 1940s. And I was going to add some of this in it, and I didn't. Will I in the future? We'll see. But anyway, so from a modern history textbook, here's some of the main points, and you'll see some of the biases or interpretations from the textbook. So first, migration from the U.S. into Western territories surged in the 30s and 40s. This belief in expansion, this actually action of expanding, was really gripping the nation, and people were moving west, unprecedented to the numbers they were moving west earlier in our nation's history. In 1836, after winning independence from Mexico, Texans voted to be annexed by the United States. So that's another issue, is how did we acquire Texas? You know, Six Flags, right? Six Flags flew over Texas because it's literally been under so many different powers. Americans, however, were far from united on the question of annexation. Did we really need more land? How should we obtain that land? Was that land going to just become slave territory, right? So a big motive for expansion was to expand slavery and to expand slave powers. A lot of the opposition came from the New England states and the Northeast, from abolitionists as well. Many people in both the North and the South, more so the North, but still some in the South, worried that annexation would lead to war with Mexico. And surprise, it did. And later that year, Democrat James K. Polk wins the presidency. So he won that in, you didn't read that year, but he won the presidency if he came in 1844. So here's more lines from the textbook. In March of 1845, 1 month after Congress approved annexation, Mexico broke off diplomatic relations with the United States. So there's some fill in the blanks parts here, since I'm jumping paragraph to paragraph. President Polk and other Southern Democrats, he was a Democrat, wanted much more from Mexico than just Texas, right? They weren't going to be satisfied with just Texas. I have a teacher pulling up next to me. They probably wonder what the heck I'm doing here. Determined to have his way, Polk sent more than 3,000 American troops under General Zachary Taylor into the disputed areas south of Texas. So people did sign up to enroll from all over the United States. Once again, not as many from New England. And Mexican troops engaged in a skirmish with Taylor's forces in late April 1846. All right, so this is the textbook story. It also mentions the Bear Flag Revolt. Before news of the war with Mexico even reached California, a group of American settlers took matters in their own hands. So California is not part of the United States, but you have Americans in California. In July 1846, U.S. troops under General Stephen Kearny crossed into New Mexico. Now, here's a fun fact I'll share with you. General Kearny, he was actually born in Newark, New Jersey. He didn't really spend his life there, but he was born there. Now, you may know of the city, Kearny, not far from here. I have a cousin who's a cop in Kearny and a cousin who's a firefighter in Kearny. But that town's name came from Major General Philip Kearny, who was Stephen Kearny's nephew and who fought in the Civil War. So, fun fact. All right. So, more from the textbook, The Fighting in New Mexico. So, Fremont, who was in California, and Kearny were securing Mexico's northern territories. General Taylor had taken the war in Mexico. So, it's fought in several different fronts. Here he met Santa Anna, pictured here, who had brought an army of 20,000 troops north from Mexico City. Santa Anna abandoned northeastern Mexico to Taylor, in part because of a serious threat to the capital. They wanted to keep Mexico City protected. All right, so now let's get into some of the nuts and bolts of it. Next video, we're going to get into Manifest Destiny. And there was a push to move west from the earliest days of this country. The idea of Manifest Destiny didn't really come about till 1845 under John O'Sullivan, who was a newspaper editor. And we're going to get into that. But also, there wasn't the same push to go west with the first 5-6 presidents as there was afterwards. So Manifest Destiny, now I'm not going to say they didn't ever go west, right? Washington wanted to buy lands in Western Virginia, Western Pennsylvania, but that there's definitely a different element here. So with Manifest Destiny, you get the idea of it was the role and even the duty of the U.S. to spread all over the continent, right? From sea to shining sea, right? Don't have me sing, but you get the idea. And as they do so, they would spread Protestant, that's key, you'll see in a minute, and democratic values. And democratic values did spread west, right? For good or for bad, as it happened. So as I mentioned earlier, in 1844, Polk was elected. Why was he elected? Well, a big part of it was because a lot of the people in America really liked that he was pushing to move west and acquire more land. So he not only vowed to take Texas as a new state, but he vowed to take it as a slave state. That's important. He also vowed to take Oregon, right? That's really important for a port, especially for access to Asia. And 5440, this is a tongue twister, 5440 or fight. It asserted the U.S.'s right to gain full control of what was known as Oregon country from its southwestern border at the 42-degree latitude to its northern border at the 5440-degree latitude. That's where that comes in. So how should we acquire, if we're going to acquire Mexico, how should we acquire it? Do we acquire it by diplomacy or do we acquire it by force? All right. What's the best way to do this? Now, obviously, diplomacy, most people would say, well, that's the way. If you're going to do it, that's the way to do it. But what? You need both sides to agree with diplomacy. So do you resort to force if diplomacy can't be met? California, at the time, was a Mexican state. There was a revolt in California, and it divided the state into two. Polk tried to purchase Upper California, so that would be diplomacy, and also New Mexico. He also encouraged settlers, to declare independence from Mexico. So let's have Americans go to California, get enough of them there, and then they'll say, hey, we want independence from Mexico. All right, so see the strategy there? War eventually comes. Where is the border? Is it the Rio Grande or is it the river to the north? Polk sends troops, right, into disputed territory in 1846. Polk wanted a war. Polk wanted this territory. Oh, it says my computer's going to die. You better not want that here. So they go into disputed territory and basically they instigate what happens. There is a skirmish while the Mexican troops are patrolling the other side of the river. 16 soldiers are killed. Some say a total of 16 were killed or wounded. Polk said that Mexico invaded our territory and shed American blood upon American soil, urges Congress to declare war, and shortly after they do. So he got the war that he wanted. Like I said, there were some people opposed to this. One of them was a senator at the time. You may have heard of him. His name was Abraham Lincoln. And he introduced what's known as the spot resolutions. Many anti-slavery legislatures thought that, there's a big typo here. Oh my gosh. Oh no, I should just delete this whole thing now. He was trying to instigate war to add more slave territory. No, I get fired. All right. So Lincoln said that he wanted to see whether the particular spot of soil on which the blood of citizens was so shed was or was not our own soil. So in other words, show me where these Americans were killed. Was this American territory? I want to see the spot. I want to see where the spot of blood came. Now, some people thought that was insensitive because, I mean, Americans did die, but did they die at the hands of like our country taking some bad action or not? Right? They wanted some answers. So I wanted to show you this because now you will have many issues here. Keep in mind the people of Mexico were Catholic, right? And please remember the difference that in Christianity, there's Catholics and Protestants. And while there were Catholics in our country, the majority were Protestant. And how a lot of people were opposed to just adding on to America if that meant you're going to add on Catholics. Or if you're going to add on mixed race people, which many of the people in Mexico were at the time. What was the military strategy? To take control of northern Mexico, including New Mexico. And this was done under the hands of General Zachary Taylor, who was known as Old Rough and Ready, gets acclaimed by the public, and Polk's actually worried that these military generals are going to beat him and become the next president. So he's actually becomes threatened by them. Then also to seize California and ultimately to capture Mexico. Then we have here General Winfield Scott. I think there was something I wanted to share with you about him. I think it was more about also a military leader that Polk saw as a threat. A lot in that book I read about Scott, so maybe I will bring that in. Ultimately, in February of 1848, you get the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. I know there's a lot of words here. It was a triumph if you are a fan of American expansion. Mexico ceded nearly half of its land, that's a lot, to the United States. So that land included the current states of California, but also New Mexico, Arizona, Nevada, Utah, and portions of Colorado and Wyoming. It recognized the Rio Grande as the border. The U.S. promised to grant Mexican citizens in the territory U.S. citizenship. So you can now become a U.S. citizen if you lived there once they became states. Promised to recognize the Spanish land grants in New Mexico as well. And the U.S. agreed to pay over $3 million worth of Mexican debts owed to U.S. citizens. Paid Mexico $15 million for the loss of its land. Like, hey, I know we have half your territory. Here's $15 million. And promised to guard the residents of the Mexican secession from Native American raids. So that seems like, hey, that's going to be a good thing to you. You're going to want to become Americans. Were they really able to protect them also? We'll see with the Indian Wars. Not always. What was the American response? Well, some were happy with this, especially those that wanted to increase slavery and the U.S. being a slave power. Some wanted all of Mexico. Like, this isn't enough. We want the whole thing. Some didn't like it for not so much noble reasons. They just didn't want a large mestizo population as part of the U.S. If we're going to have manifest destiny, we want a quote-unquote white Protestant America, which also meant they did not want a large group of Roman Catholics now in their country. Now you have Catholic voters, right? There's many consequences. I'll just mention one real quickly here. We have the gold rush. In January of 1848, Marshall discovered gold in a sawmill that he built with his partner, John Sutter. And within a few weeks, once gold was discovered, all of his employees left him high and dry. So yeah, we're going to go look for some more. News reached San Francisco, and then thousands come to California, and eventually many people all around the world, right? That is where the San Francisco 49ers got their name from. You best know that, people. All right, I do want to say that a big consequence as well is that many of the Civil War generals cut their teeth, so to speak, during the Mexican War, learned a lot about war, gained a lot of military experience, one of them being Grant. Grant is someone I study a lot for my research and my writing. And in his memoirs, he writes a lot about his time in the Mexican War. And it is notable to say that he was not a fan. He did not think that it was a just war. that it was just a stronger nation trying to take from a weaker nation. Lee, right? They looked much different in their Mexican War days, didn't they? This is from a piece from Alan Galzo, a historian that I've been lucky enough to study under. And it didn't seem so much that Lee had his mind changed about the philosophy of the war, but it really shaped the way he looked at things militarily speaking, strategically speaking, politically thinking. And you can pause this and read it if you wish. And this is from the website, the American Battlefield Trust. I just showed, it had a list of many of the other famous generals and leaders from the Civil War who also gained experience in the Mexican War, from Stonewall Jackson to Braxton Bragg, McClellan. And we see a lot of the pictures like this, but when I go over that one book, I want to point out to you is a lot of this was street fighting, urban warfare, and a lot of atrocities done by the American troops, unfortunately, in that manner. So what I want to read to you guys actually is a preface to a book, since we've been studying a little bit about Jackson. So it sort of combines the ideas of Manifest Destiny and the Mexican War. If my video dies and you don't read the whole thing, I can read this later in class. But it's from the book Jackson's Way. I've had this for a while. And in fact, the preface I want to read, my children once had access to this book. You can see what happened here. But if you bear with me and reflect on this, and this is something you want to continue to write in your notes, some of these ideas. So the struggle for the great empire that lay between the Appalachian Mountains and the Mississippi River began a century before the American victory in the War of the Revolution and the recognition of Great Britain in 1783. So these roots go back, right? The contest would continue for another 4 decades. The prize was all of the territory south of the Ohio River, the modern states of Kentucky, Tennessee, Mississippi, Alabama, and Louisiana. Florida also hung in the balance. Okay, so you don't get to the Mexican land yet. It is a tale once familiar to Americans, but little known today. For the near total emphasis in our time on the occupation of the country between the Mississippi and the Pacific, right? So here we go, with its endless streams of horse, Indians, and cavalry, and cowboys, and those blips on historical radar, homicidal gunfighters, has rendered hazy international memory that earlier, far greater conflict. Yet in its significance for the future of North America, in savagery and loss of life, plot and counterplot, larger-than-life players, and an outcome that remained for contemporaries unpredictable almost to the end. The struggle for what was once called the Old Southwest was an epic, whereas the filling of the Trans-Mississippi West was but an interlude between a fight for empire and emergence of the United States as a world power in the 20th century. So we acquired these lands in a variety of different ways, right? Some with treaties, some with wars, some we just purchased, right? To put it in military terms, the earlier conflict was a war, the later a mopping up operation. Doubters may point to the Texas Revolution from 1835 to 1836 and the Mexican War, 1846 to 1848, as major exceptions. But the Texans' revolt against Mexico lasted only 7 months and had one decisive battle, an 18-minute skirmish, really, at San Jacinto, where the Mexican army melted at first contact. In the Mexican War, the big decisive battles were fought in mostly Mexico. So look at that. If you look at this map here, these little red sabers, that's where like some of the big battles were fought. And you notice that many of the biggest battles were actually in land that is still Mexico, land that did not become part of the United States. What does that imply? Does that make a difference? Right? Historians have traditionally taken liberties with the geography of the Old Southwest, and I shall join them in doing so. And he goes on then to explain some of this. So I read this to try to reflect, does it matter how we acquire lands? Are some acquired more legitimately than others? Does your motive matter, regardless of how it's acquired? Right? I'm curious to know your thoughts, and this is something we'll talk about a bit in class. So I'll bring in some more maybe specific individual stories of the Mexican War, some military stories, and we'll talk more about the effects as we get into our future lessons. All right, stay tuned.